Okay. So first of all, this is just stuff I've learned. This isn't, there's a lot of stuff written about the philosophy of what these things should do. I'm going to talk about really how do you design these things, not philosophically, um, but how do you actually evaluate what you've got? Um, how did I learn it? Well, I've been going in and evaluating organizations for 40 years. And I've been doing accident analysis for investigation for a lot of years. And some organizations have lots of accidents, others have fewer none. And so what I've learned is, so what you're going to hear is what I've learned about what differentiates these kinds of organizations. There is some stuff in the literature that I'll mention when there is something actually documented, but a lot of this is just my own experience. Um, and I believe that as an engineer, a system engineer, that you're designing your safety management system is a system engineering problem, and we should treat it as a system engineering problem. As I said, there's lots of standard designs. People will tell you that, especially if you pay them a lot of money, they'll tell you what uh, your your system should look like. They're usually limited in some way. Instead, I believe you need to design something comprehensive that meets your specific needs. We need to proactively control safety in every aspect of the organization. Um, and it's going to be somewhat different if you're developing a product versus you're providing services. There are some similarities, there are some differences, and I'll mention it when it makes a difference. Um, in general, what's the overall most important thing is an effective learning process. We have to be able to learn, and we have to identify what normally happens before an accident is your safety management system degrades and nobody notices. Um, Everything changes over time. We can't keep things from changing. We need to identify when it changes. And we need to continually learn our from what we're doing and what's effective and what's not effective. Okay, so starting from there and figuring out how to change slides here. In my definition, there's three parts of a safety management system. All right. There's at the top I have here, this triangle, I have the safety culture. We have a safety information system, and we have a safety management structure. And I'm going to go through each of these in this session. Culture defines the desirable and effective behavior and value system in your organization. And again, we're going to go into more detail about this. I just want to describe quickly what I mean by each of these. The safety management structure determines how the cultural goals are going to be implemented. And the safety information system provides the information to make the management structure successful. You can have a great structure, but if you don't have the right information, it's not going to work for you. So let's start with safety culture. There's lots of people who talk about safety culture. I like the definition by Edgar Schein. And it's the same kind of definition that's used in anthropology and social sciences about what we mean by a culture in a culture in a society is the same as a culture in an organization can be thought of. There's three levels in an organization. At the very bottom are the values and deep cultural assumptions under which we make decisions, under which we live our life. Based on those cultural assumptions, we develop organizational rules, policies, practices. Those are like the laws. The law in the United States may be very different than the law in Fiji. And the way, because it's based on different underlying cultures, value systems. So at the very bottom is the basic safety culture. Above that are these rules, policies, and practices, and above that, we create surface level cultural artifacts. Um, and the top two reflect the basic culture, but the bottom one is the basic safety culture. If you try and only change the top two, which is what normally happens, it's not going to have any lasting impact. If you just make some more rules for people to follow, or more things, paperwork for them to fill out in terms of the cultural artifacts, or new analysis methods. If you just say, we're going to all use Stpa, it's not going to necessarily be very effective without changing that bottom level. And also, you need to change culture. You need to change the environment in which it's embedded. Now, whether people say there's no safety culture, or there's always a culture. There is always some kind of safety culture. It may not be effective in promoting safe behavior and safe results, but there's always some kind of safety culture. Bad or good, it's there. So that's the first thing I noticed. People seem to think that there is something without a culture. There is no cultureless society or organization. It doesn't happen. All right, so what are some of the types of high accident safety cultures that I've seen and learned about in my 40 years? And one of this is a culture of risk acceptance. This is a culture where accidents are considered inevitable. They're considered the price of productivity. Usually, by the way, there are certain industries that do this in the industry, and then, there's the industry culture, and then there's the specific organizational culture. So, for example, in mining, unfortunately, has been accused of having a culture of risk assessment. There's this belief everyone should be responsible for safety, their own and others, and we're going to come back to this. Everyone can't be responsible for safety. If in your group or your organization it's believed that everyone and promoted everyone's responsible safety, then nobody is responsible for safety. And the third part of this is accidents result from lack of responsible behavior by individuals. If everyone just acted responsibly and safely, we wouldn't have accidents. There's this sort of belief here, all right? Now that's one kind of flawed safety culture that results in lots of high accident rates. There's also a culture of denial. There's this reliance on risk assessment, usually unrealistically low. It's amazing. Everything is at least 10 to the minus 9 or less. Warnings are dismissed without appropriate investigation. Management wants to hear good news, so that's what they're told. And the focus is on showing the system is acceptably safe, not on identifying ways that might be unsafe. So we want to deny, we want to prove that that this is safe and that now we're all fine, everything's fine. There's three others. There's a culture of compliance. By the way, these are not necessarily disjoint. They could be you can have multiple of these. There's a culture of compliance, which is very common. The focus is on complying with government regulations. And there's this belief that as long as you comply, you're going to be safe. And that's all you have to do. And that's all management wants to spend their time and effort and resources on. There's also usually a lot of after-the-fact assurance emphasized with an extensive safety case arguments that have little impact on the actual product or process. After the thing's built, you're not going to be able to have much impact on the design, and yet, but then they build it and then try and assure that it's safe. That's the way I call it, culture of compliance. Another common culture is a culture of paperwork. There's this assumption that producing lots of documentation and analysis paperwork is going to lead to somehow safer products and services. In safety engineering through the years, I've seen all these books, and they'll have several hundred pages of describing every form that you have to fill out and every little piece of the form and what you should put in that form. Another aspect of this, usually a common aspect, is the paperwork is produced by a group independent of and with little interaction with those designing and operating the products. So people who are designing and operating products haven't got time to spend 100% of their time filling out forms and doing paperwork. So what they do is you create another whole group here. Sometimes you even outsource this to another company. And their goal, what they do is fill out all these forms, implement the processes. So there's very little in the end impact on design and operations, because those are operating products, implementing the processes, providing the services, aren't producing the paper, and the paperwork doesn't have any impact on it. And finally, there's a fifth kind, and you could probably think of others besides, but this is sort of the culture of swagger. This is some industries, and it's getting better after the accidents. But for example, a past example was offshore oil exploration. Safety's for sissies, real men thrive on risk. Okay, so I have a poll here. John, would you show the poll? And
Yep.
You can do multiple choice here. You can, because sometimes companies have multiple ones, or industries. If you're not in a company, think about the industry you're in. If you're in a university, but you're often working in automotive or aviation or something, think about your industry. Which ones do you are representative of what you've seen?
Lots of responses are coming in. The top result so far seems to be compliance-based culture.
Interesting.
It's
Yeah,
not the
I'm not
only, but it's a
surprised.
big one.
It's also the easiest to identify. Um, Denial, risk acceptance exists probably as much, but it's harder to see it. You can see that you're just complying with the standards very easily. All right, why don't you show the results? Okay, so compliance and paperwork, as I would guess, risk acceptance, denial, swagger, and I swagger twice. I'm not surprised that that's small. I mean, we've sort of gotten away from that, especially with all the liability that we're finding in the amount of money it costs when you have a giant oil spill. People have said, this maybe have been historically true, but probably management has decided we have to get rid of this. Okay, so compliance, definitely, and paperwork is what I see all the time. And it looks like you do too. All right, so moving on. What about, so I talked about the bad things. Let's look at some of the features of an effective safety culture. There's not one right or wrong. I'm not going to be able to tell you, do this, 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 and it's a good culture. It depends upon the problems you're trying to solve, the all kinds of things. But some of these are things that seem to be true in companies that don't have high accident rates. So management understands that safety and productivity go together. There's openness about safety and the safety goals, and management is willing to hear bad news. That's important. Sometimes management just doesn't want to hear it. There's emphasis on doing what's necessary and not just complying with government regs and producing a lot of paperwork. And they may not even get a lot of credit because The government agency overseeing you says, all I care is you comply with this, this, and this. But there are companies and who are where the leaders are wise enough to understand that that in the long run this is going to cost them money. The third one, employees believe managers want to hear their safety concerns and will take action. Managers believe the employees are worth listening to and worthy of respect. Employees feel safe reporting concerns. They feel that their voice is valued. And safety is a shared responsibility. But responsibility just isn't placed only on the workforce to keep themselves and others safe. It's not just everybody's responsible for themselves. There are people who have, yes, everyone should be responsible for not being acting unsafely, but somebody has to be responsible to make sure it really happens. So we had another poll here of John that you can put up. And this is some of the good things that your company or industry has. So while you're voting, I'll tell you what we're going to do later is look at how do you design your safety management system and your safety information system to be able to help achieve these good things. Because they have to be built in. They're designed in. It's not just wishful thinking everybody's going to do all the right things. All right, I think you can show the answers. All right, so we sort of have the absolute percentages, but there's actually a fair number of people. And I think, and it's great. And this is probably why you have management that's willing to give you time to attend this meeting and this workshop. But there's a fair number of people that feel that their companies have these good things, and that's great. So how do we, I'm not sure why this won't. How do we improve the safety culture? Well, the first thing to know is safety culture is set by the top management in the organization. You can have all the greatest intentions by people lower down, but you can't change culture. That's kind of depressing. So it means we're going to have to help management understand these things, because the top management sets the goals and the requirements for achieving those goals in an organization. They establish what's expected in safety-related decision-making and behavior, and people will conform to what's expected and what they feel. Not only sometimes it's directly told them, but sometimes it's indirectly they understand this is what's expected of them. The second thing is how do they change, top management change it? Well, you need to communicate the basic values you want people to follow. I have a paper, by the way, with much more information on the website, along with these slides. They're up on the website. And it gives more examples and some great stories of people who really were able to totally change the culture when a new CEO came in that really believed in safety. And not only did they then radically decrease the number of accidents, they actually greatly increase profits and productivity because they go together. So how do you create the basic values? One of the most important things that people may not have is to create a safety philosophy statement for your organization or your industry. There are examples in the paper of what it is. I'm going to show you an example on the next slide. Well, I can just do that now. Here's a philosophy statement. It should be short. Everybody has tons of documentation on what to do with safety, how to do your safety analysis, all the procedures you're supposed to follow. That's not what I'm talking about. There, in addition, should be a very short statement of what should be the values in your organization. This is just an example. I have some other examples of things that might be in there in the paper. One of them might be preventing accidents is good business. Increasing quality and safety lead to decreasing cost and schedule and a long-term increased profits. Safety and productivity go hand in hand. Safety commitment, openness, and honesty are valued or rewarded in the organization. Safety analysis must be surfaced without fear. Safety analysis will be conducted without blame. Now, it's easy to write these things down. And I see this, I'll go in an organization, I have things everywhere about safety is our number one priority. Sometimes I go in the ladies' room, it's on the mirrors up in there. You see it on the halls everywhere, be safe. I'm usually pretty skeptical, and usually I'm there because they have big safety problems. You can create the philosophy statement, but there has to be wide buy-in, including top management. Top management has to believe it and live it and make decisions, because people don't believe just what they're told. They believe what people do. We understand what people believe by watching their behavior. And people will immediately see that this is just a bunch of words and baloney that people are trying to sell. So there has to be wide buy-in, and there has to be lower management that doesn't follow these things have to be removed. That's how upper management makes sure that everyone believes this. So there has to be, and they have to demonstrate a commitment to that follow-up by personal involvement. So, for example, in some of the very large defense programs, the head of the whole program, a top general, would insist that they chaired the safety committee at the Pentagon level. That doesn't mean they made every committee meeting, but it was a statement they were trying to make that this is important enough for me to put my effort into. Setting priorities, providing resources tells people what the real philosophy is. Rewarding employees for safety efforts, responding to initiatives that people take in safety. So that's safety culture. Again, there's a lot more in the paper. There's a limit to how much time there is in this tutorial. So look it up. There's lots of examples of how people came in and changed the safety culture in their group or in their industry. So now let's look at the safety management structure. That's the safety control structure, what we call it. It's just another name for safety management structure. And in any good management, I have a degree in management that I usually never tell anyone about, a master's degree. But we need a clear definition of the expectations, the responsibilities, authority, and accountability of everything, all levels of every group in your safety management system. The higher levels are going to control the interactions among the lower components, like we've heard. There's feedback and coordination, or there needs to be. So if you're looking at your safety management system, draw a structure and see, look at the feedback. It's the exact same thing as at the technical level. Problems occur often because of inadequate, of mental models, of process models. People think that the thing that people are behaving differently than they really are. And if they can't get feedback, if you have your mental model, your process model is incorrect of the things you're responsible for, clearly, I mean, it's just simple logic. You've got a problem. You also need, I'm going to talk more about this, leading indicators and ways to identify when you're losing effectiveness. You know, in engineering, we design this system, we design the plane, and we assume that's it. The car, it's going to be that way forever. First of all, it isn't. Things change, but also people change. People behave, the operators change, the people maintaining, the people, everybody changes. And that's a good thing. That's actually not a bad thing. It's good that people change, and that, because that, if our organizations and our industries and our companies were totally inflexible and didn't change with the changing situation, the changing environment, we'd be out of business. So we want change. What we will need to be careful of, and I'm going to talk more about this, is that identifying when the changes are dangerous, when the changes are increasing risk. There's a basic principle of that for system safety and accidents. Almost all accidents occur after some kind of change. And we're going to talk about management of change. That means that we've got to understand and control change, some changes, but we want to encourage changes and improvements. So here's some questions for you to answer about your own organization, about assigning, and they're related to how do you assign responsibility. One of the things that I see is that safety sometimes becomes safety, the management in safety is a rotational assignment. And this is a way of getting young people educated about the different parts of the company, and they rotate in here and they rotate in there and they rotate in so on. So it's not necessarily chosen by those who are passionate about safety. You want your leaders in safety to be passionate about it. As you can sort of tell, John and I and Bill are pretty passionate about what we do. And the most effective people are passionate, not just doing a job. And that means there needs to be a career path within safety. And sometimes there isn't. Is there a way to go up in your organization by continuing to be within safety? Is everyone responsible for safety? Bad idea. Are there specific responsibilities assigned at all levels of the management structure? Is someone assigned to be responsible? Now here's one, often doesn't happen. Is someone assigned to be responsible for ensuring that the safety management system is designed and working properly? We may not get it right perfectly the first time. It probably won't. And as I said, the world changes and things change. So is there someone who's responsible for making sure it's still working well? That is there feedback? Is there a way of getting information about whether this is working well? What about where in the organization should it be? Where do we put the safety group? And so here's some questions, again, you can ask about your particular group. Is there an enterprise level group with direct access to top management? often accidents occur and things happen because top management has no idea that there's problems below. They just aren't getting the right information. They're not getting the information they need to make better decisions about risk. Um, Someone has to, so they're getting filtered stuff. This is what we've heard about in some of the recent accidents of in, in, in aviation, that that the people at the bottom knew there was a problem, and but it somehow got filtered out and didn't get to the people at the top who were making the important decisions. Do we launch this plane? Do we sell it? Do we do whatever? Um, so that group, what are they doing? Well, they're coordinating things. They're making sure that activities are being implemented and that they're effective. And they're making sure that the management decisions above them are informed. Now, this may be at the senior executive, VP level in an organization. We also have a lot of times the board of directors should be responsible for safety, and we see too often they don't see that that's their responsibility, or they don't know anything about it. But they're also overseeing top management and whether decisions are informed and whether they're good decisions. Another thing I've seen in organizations, sometimes safety is at the executive level, but it's a staff level function alone. So we have the line organization here, we have the staff organization here. So the staff people are creating all kinds of documents and all kinds of requirements and guidelines and handbooks and all this stuff, and nobody in the line is actually implementing them. So there has to be, if you have a staff organization, there has to be some connection to, so that it has an impact on line operations. This is maybe a little controversial, but I found that organizations that mix in the same group workplace safety, often got EHS, environmental health and safety, and system engineering and engineering safety in the same group have very large number of accidents. One of the reasons is that there's lots of data on workplace safety. You know, you have all the little accidents that occurred and how many golden days, how many days you had without an accident in your factory. So there's all this data, but there's no numbers. There's no data from engineering safety. I mean, you're not going to shoot off a nuclear weapon accidentally daily or monthly. I mean, hopefully never. So what we found is, for example, in Deepwater Horizon, this was all mixed up in BP. I'll pick on BP. They never listened to me. So I get disgusted and stop trying to help them. So now I'm sure this is a long time ago. They probably fixed things now, hopefully. But they were getting all this data from workplace safety, and so that's what you concentrate on. They were also, the management was being paid and incentivized on those numbers, because this was the question we had, probabilities, numbers. It's easy for management to make decisions about numbers, and those numbers then can be used to decide whether someone gets promoted, whether they get a raise. So what happens is all the attention then goes on workplace safety. Separate them. But on the other hand, I also see way too often system safety integrated with not integrated with system engineering. It used to be, when it started, system safety started in the military and defense world 70 years ago in the 1950s and 60s, it was all part of system engineering. And then for some reason, people decided to separate them. And often they put system safety in QA, and I think that's because they looked at this as an assurance thing, not an engineering design activity. And so they didn't want to be influenced by the engineers. QA, sorry for anyone who's in QA, QA tends to have the lowest stature in an engineering organization. And you don't want system safety to be in a low stature organization. The other thing is, this is what NASA used to do, and is part of the problems of why we had those big shuttle accidents. I've written papers about that if anyone's interested. The other thing is that if the people are over here creating all this paperwork, and the people over here are making engineering decisions, and they don't get together until the review at near the end of the project, the CDR, even PDR, but it's late. Decisions have already been made. And that's not going to be held. You can't. So all the safety engineers just get argued with. So the engineers argue with them, and because they can't make the changes. And if they lose the argument, they add a little redundancy, they add all this little other stuff, but it's too late to be really effective. So, and the next one, do decision makers have direct access to information needed? That's clear. All right, so let me show you. We had a question yesterday. This is an example. SubSafe is the safety program within the nuclear submarine, U.S. nuclear submarine program. SubSafe has been astoundingly effective. They had an accident. They lost a submarine in the Thresher in 1963, and Admiral Rickover, who was in charge of the program, a great engineer and a pretty, I understand, tyrannical people, and called up his people working for him and said, you will have a program in effect designed in 3 months and operational in 6 months that will never allow this to happen again. And it has never happened again. What is this, 57 years or whatever? That's an enormous and incredible success story. And it is one of the best designed programs. If you want to find more about it, unfortunately, people don't write about it, or people claim that whatever they do, SubSafe uses. That's not true. I've worked with SubSafe for the last 40 years. And so I know what's in SubSafe. I wrote a chapter in my book. So in Engineering a Safer World, I'm not trying to sell books, as we said yesterday, you can get a free copy. There's a whole chapter on what SubSafe and why it's so effective, why I believe it's so effective. And I had the top people I had review it, including someone who actually he's retired at the time, but created the SubSafe program. I had the person who'd been in charge of SubSafe for 20 years look at my chapter and review it, and I made any changes they told me that of things that weren't correct. So I'm pretty confident about this chapter. Now, one of the things, there was a question yesterday about the program manager and a comment, and it was right on. I mean, they said program managers do short-term thinking, basically. You know, they just want to get this thing out. And safety isn't their highest priority. And that's absolutely true. So SubSafe handles this by creating this group, what they call the three-legged stool. There's the platform program manager, or platform in Navy speak is the ship, all right? That's the person who's in charge of getting this ship built and out the door. There's also an independent technical authority that provide technically acceptable alternatives, and they ensure adherence to standards. They do the safety analysis and the safety assessment. The platform manager is only allowed to select from acceptable options that are provided by the ITA. There's also a third group, the Independent Safety and Quality Assurance Authority, which does the compliance verification. I'm not saying that compliance verification isn't important. I'm saying don't put your safety engineering group over there. That's not where they should be. In SubSafe, they're in the ITA. And people tell me, you know, through the years, the platform managers, I can't do all this. You know, we're never going to produce another submarine and get them out the door. You guys are making me do all this stuff. I can't do it. You're hamstringing me. We can't. And the SubSafe management, the admirals above say, tough, do it. Because they have to be supported by top management. Otherwise, the independent technical authority loses their effectiveness. This has been terribly effective. Again, more in the book about it. So what about communication and coordination? Are there people with overlapping responsibilities? You may want overlapping responsibilities in your safety control structure, but if so, there has to be some means for coordination. For example, when changes are made, and so on. The DoD, who have been trying to deal with these astoundingly complex projects for 70 years, has come up with this idea called a working group. A working group means that the people, that they have these groups at every level. You can have a working group at the Pentagon level. You can have a working group at the prime contractor level, which includes a representative from each of the subcontractors. Each of the subcontractors within their engineering groups, they have working groups. And the idea is they reduce uncoordinated and fragmented activities because they meet and share what they're doing. They share, for example, we just found another hazard in the wing design or something, and the other people are doing propulsion said, oh, wow, we need to take that into account. At the highest levels, at the Pentagon levels, they're sharing higher level kinds of information. So in your group, when you're doing your analysis, which I think you should do after this, a formal analysis of your organization, what communication exists between development and between operations? Sometimes there's very little information. So the developers have found all this stuff about things that are problems, and they haven't communicated them well to the operators, who then have to operate this thing. And in my book, again, I don't have time to go what that is, but I specify in great detail what information has to be handed over, because the operations has to be able to operate these things safely, like an airline who's buying planes from an airframe manufacturer. They need certain information to operate this. Now, they usually often get that because it's a fairly sophisticated industry, but sometimes they don't. Is there a way of determining whether information flow is actually occurring? We can say and say, yeah, sure, we have this feedback channel and we have all these reports and all this information, there's paperwork flowing around, but is it really effective? Is the information really flowing? We may have a feedback channel which is just not operational. So there has to be some way of auditing whether the information flow is actually occurring. Here's the real kicker, and I mentioned this before: managing change. Virtually every accident that I see, not all, but almost all, and I read about, and that happened in the past, occur after a change. Now, why would that be? Well, because you've got things sort of going okay, and you handle them, and you've got things pretty safe. So I have to be some change for something horrible to happen. Um, and, and most companies know this. For example, Flixborough um, had, which is a giant, a chemical plant explosion in England, which is quite a while ago, but it really started a lot of the emphasis in UK on safety. They just they had a corroded piece of pipe or a problem with a pipe, and they jury rigged up something that no one ever that a safety engineer never looked at. Has this happened? Is this just Flixborough long ago? Um, Deepwater Horizon. Um, Virtually every accident, there's some kind of change. Usually, an organization has a book, has documentation of all the management change procedures that are supposed to be followed. We can do a hand here. How many people have a management of change document in your organization? John, can you read those? I can't, but.
We had a technical issue with the chat, and it looks like it may have just come back.
Oh, so, all right. So never mind. We'll just go on. The problem is it's usually documented. Almost always I go into a company and they say, oh yeah, we've got this management and change document here, and they give me this large document. And then I try and say, is it being followed? Is it effective? Is it practical? So when I go into an organization, the first thing I insist on doing is interviewing people. And I may interview 30, 40 people in different kinds of positions in the organization. And we talk about privately, and I tell them everything's anonymous. I'm just trying to help and things. And can you share with me some of the things that you like that seem to be going well and some of the things that don't go so well? And and I asked them about their management change, and they said, "Oh yeah, we've got that." I said, "Do you follow it?" And they said, "Well, usually we do." And I said, "Well, if you aren't following it in the situation, why?" And they said, "Well, it's a small change. It's too expensive. It's too time consuming. It's too difficult to go through all this up for the small change that I'm doing." And that's the Flixborough thing, We're only going to jury rig this stuff for a few days. So find out that out. Go ask people. See whether they're really using it. And if they aren't, find out why and fix that. So, and someone in your management structure should be responsible for ensuring that the management change procedures are being followed. When I go back to the management after I talk to these people and I say, people aren't following your management change procedures, who's responsible for making sure they are? And they sort of look at each other and they, oh yeah, they are. They're following them. I said, no, they aren't. Here these people are admitting to me that they're not following them. What kind of feedback channels do you have to make sure that they're following them and that they're doing a good job with them? Plan changes, however, are the easier part of the problem. There are also unplanned changes, changes that you didn't know about. They just happen. The world changes. People behave differently over time. The environment changes. In an airline, air traffic control changes, or things change. The airports change. And those are the unplanned changes. And that's harder to deal with. The planned ones are hard enough, but the unplanned ones, how do you detect that a critical unplanned change has occurred? There's always changes occurring. Things change continually. Daily things are going to change in small ways. The way that that's usually done is with something called a leading indicator. A leading indicator should be a way of measuring or getting an indication that risk is increasing. I'm going to talk later about how you actually do that. All right, so first you have to detect it, but detecting it isn't enough. You need to have somebody responsible for responding. People people don't want it. It's something called in psychology defensive avoidance. They don't want to hear bad news, and they don't want things to get in the way of their productivity. And so they tend to sort of ignore these leading indicators. Um, Sometimes you have to require it. Sometimes you have to say in your organization and your rules of your organization, if you get an indication that of a leading indicator or indication that something has changed, then you must respond, um, because people will delay and they'll put it off. How, and this, the next point about risk being reevaluated. And we all do this too. I mean, every one of us is guilty of doing the same thing. We, 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 we evaluate the risk of something. And then over time, it doesn't happen. And we reevaluate the risk downward. This happened in, I written again in my paper on the shuttle and why the shuttle, especially why the Columbia accident occurred, is that people after Challenger had a high level of risk. I mean, they just had an accident and people, but over time, they didn't have another accident. And in fact, when I was on ASAP, the aviation safety panel, aerospace safety, anyway, I was on this panel with this group for NASA at the top of NASA, and we reported to Congress and to the administrator, and we were looking at this. And actually, I got fired from this thing because I wrote a report how that they were headed for a big accident, two flights before Columbia, and they didn't like that answer. But what we knew things were breaking. They were just lucky. This is an old device. Risk was probably increasing, not decreasing. But these people, this not device, but vehicle, we were finding things like cracks in important parts, and they were just lucky. Somebody had better than 20/20 vision happened to see this crack before the thing actually flew. And it was really lucky, and they should have said, oh my God, this was just really lucky. Instead, they evaluated as, well, look, we're having problems, but we're finding all the problems. In fact, we're improving the shuttle. Risk is going down. You haven't had an accident in 10, 12 years. Risk is going down. People will informally do that. And it's not just in this shuttle, it's everywhere. We all do it. So we need protection. We need to design our systems to protect against that reevaluation downward. How do you do that? Well, I'm going to talk sort of more about risk and risk management in a few minutes. It's not easy because it's a psychological thing that everyone does. It's very hard to get us to work against our normal instincts, but I'll talk a little more about it. We need feedback. I said feedback is critical. Are the appropriate feedback channels defined and working? They may be defined, they may not be working. What kinds of audits and performance assessments are performed to ensure that people are really doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are they based on identified hazards and safety constraints, or you just go in and look at them? Is there an audit of whether the safety control structure itself is working as designed? Not just whether all the people working for you, especially at the lowest level, are doing what they're supposed to be doing, but is the control structure itself working? How is the audit information gathered and used? Is the goal to find deviations and potentially punitive actions, or to identify improvements? We've all experienced. We hear there's going to be an audit the next week or the next month, and everybody cleans up their act, and things working perfectly. And then as soon as the auditors leave, it goes back to the way it was beforehand. That's not effective. Now, one of the reasons that happens is that audits have become punitive. The people there are afraid of being punished for not following the rules, and so they clean up their act. It's a normal kind of thing to do. One way to get rid of that is to get rid of the punitive aspects. The goal isn't to punish people. The goal is to identify what's going wrong so we can make things safer. So sometimes, in SubSafe, they have great audits. And one of the things is they put people that are being audited on the audit team. What? How can you audit yourself? Works like a charm. They don't sit around, take a whole bunch of notes, and then go away for 3 months and come back with this damning report later. What they do is sit there and talk to the people about what's going on, where the problems are, and then try and solve some of them right then. This is sort of supposed to be a no-no for audits and assessment. It works great because the people are right there and they're solving, the problem. And people say, yeah, we aren't wearing our bum cap, yeah, we don't wear the bum caps. And then you ask, well, why aren't you wearing the bum caps? And then you find out they're very hot, makes them sweat, and they can't do their job with them. And then you say, well, how could we change the environment here, the system, in order to improve? The problem is to protect you. You want to be protected. We want you to be protected. How do we solve it? And you do that during the audit. The audit is not something just there to punish people. And the other thing that SubSafe does is great is part of the audit is knowledge of the safety and what people know about the safety aspects of their job. Do they know what the rules are? Do they know why they're doing what they're doing? And how do we evaluate training by that? And so the idea is not to punish these people because they don't know, but to improve the training. After the shuttle accident, there were a bunch of Navy people and SubSafe people who went and were on the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. And they told the NASA people about the SubSafe, and the NASA people, oh, we don't believe it. All sounds good. We don't really believe it. So they said, okay, come on, we'll take you a walk around one of our ships. And one of the things they claimed, the Navy people claimed, is everybody understood their responsibilities in SubSafe. Everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing in SubSafe. And the NASA people are a little skeptical. And so the Navy people said, just pick somebody out over here. Just go talk to them. Ask them what their SubSafe responsibilities are. So they did. And the NASA people were floored. Absolutely floored, because these people knew exactly what their safety responsibilities are. How do we encourage feedback? And how are incidents and accidents investigated? This I'll go over more tomorrow. Are systemic factors identified or just symptoms? I talked about that Monday. Is the goal to identify a root cause or someone to blame? Is the whole safety management structure investigated for its role? Or do we only investigate the low-level worker and we don't look at the role of the rest of the thing? Again, talk about that tomorrow. Are the managers responsible for investigating the accidents in their chain event? Bad idea if they are, because they want to just get something, a report out and get going again, and find someone to blame who's not important, especially as long as it's not themselves that are to blame, and then go on. So you need a financially and managerially independent investigation group. Is responsibility assigned for ensuring that the fixes are implemented? After an accident, normally that happens. Somebody, you have these recommendations, and then you have so-and-so is responsible for ensuring that recommendation is implemented. Little less often is there a check that they've actually been implemented. There may be an assignment of responsibility, there may not be an implementation, but most important and rarely, is there a check that the fixes are effective? We've looked through NTSB reports over, decades, and you keep seeing the same thing being recommended, or you see the same problem occurring and the previous recommendations didn't work. Why? If that's happening, the fixes aren't working. So they're either not being implemented or they're not effective. So we need to do something about that. Designing and encouraging more about designing. What types of reporting systems exist in your organization and industry? There's lots of information about this in my book, Engineering a Safer World. How do you design them? Are they easy to use? Is it encouraged? Is there feedback to the reporter? Sometimes what happens before an accident, so common. Somebody, the operator, noticed there was a problem that was occurring, and they never reported it to anyone. And so the accident report says, well, we have to make sure that the operators report all this stuff. Well, as it turns out, sometimes I know these systems, or I talk to the people, I say, why didn't you report it? And they say, well, you have to go to this database somewhere. I don't know where it is because I only go there once every year. And they have to find it, and it's a klutzy system. And I put in the information. I spent all this time and I never get it. It looks like it goes into a black hole. I don't think anybody's using it. So these are simple things. Again, in Engineering a Safer World, I have things that you can implement to make this work so much better. Do things like thank someone when they've put in reported something. Just a message back. Thank you for reporting this. We're going to look into it. And then make sure that when you do look into it, they get feedback, that it didn't go into a black hole, and it may be feedback that we looked into this and we decided it wasn't important, and this is why, and we've closed this. But people want to feel like they're doing something useful. Sometimes we have to have protection for the reporter, and I talk about that again in the book. How does a potential reporter know when to use the reporting channel? People think, oh, well, this is just a minor thing. I'm just going to go talk to the engineers. Just culture is a great idea. Just culture is this idea of trying to get blame out of organizations. Blame is the enemy of safety. I'll talk about this again tomorrow morning in accident investigation. Just culture says, we're not looking for someone to blame. We're looking for someone for how to improve the situation and how to prevent this in the future. And you get blame out of it. It's complicated on how you do it, and you have to read about it, but it's been very effective. It's been introduced in a lot of hospitals, surprisingly well, and nurses especially have been promoting it because they're always the ones that get blamed for everything. And it's been very effective in the hospitals where it's being used. Okay, then there's a whole set of activities involved in risk management. These are identifying the hazards, identifying the causes, all the stuff we've been talking about so far this week. It's embedded somewhere in the SMS. Where is yours embedded? Who's doing it? Again, is it separate from engineering? I'm not crazy about that idea. Here, somebody asked about risk. They said, well, risk is always likelihood. Well, no, because we have a new accident causality model, which says it's not failures, which have a probability. It's control. We're defining safety in terms of control. So therefore, the risk is the effectiveness of the controls used to enforce safe system behavior. This is a totally different definition of risk than we use. And it's hard to get by because everybody says risk is severity times likelihood. That's it. We're done. But it includes the design and operation of the safety management structure, all the things I'm talking about, none of which are numbers. Note, it doesn't require determination of likelihood of events, but rather an evaluation of the controls being used to prevent them. We need to, sorry, more spam. I forgot to turn my phone off. We need to design procedures performing technical risk management activities, assign responsibility for implementing them, and create leading indicators, which I'll get to right now. Leading indicators, as I said, are an indicator, a way of determining that risk is increasing before a major loss occurs. And they're based on, so people have been very bad at identifying effective leading indicators. People have been trying for a long time, especially the chemical industry has worked very hard, and they come up with things like number of leaks and stuff, which isn't useful, and they know that. Nobody knows how to do it. So I wrote a paper about a different way to do a leading indicator. And it seems to me that they should be based on the safety assessment. We base it on Stpa. We made assumptions when we created the system of how the products and processes would behave, how the people would behave, how the components of the safety structure would behave, the environment in which these are. That's what we did, and we probably did a pretty good job. We may find some accidents where that isn't it, but the majority of the time we did a good job. As I said, something changed. So a leading indicator is a violation of one of these assumptions that undermine the original risk identification and management substance, all the procedures we created. And so we've created something called Active Stpa, and I don't know, he may be on the line, but one of my PhD students is a pilot in the Brazilian Air Force. He just finished in May. And he created, he demonstrated something called Active Stpa that's used during operations. And what it does is, and we talked to a lot of airlines, but we were able to get Cathay Pacific was willing to apply it experimentally, and it worked really well. There's also this last thing, and again, you can look up his dissertation and stuff. I had a tutorial on this last year, but didn't have time this year. One of the other things that's surprising that probability risk assessments. Here's again, people are all into this probability stuff. Are often ignored. It amazes me, just amazes me. There was in the CAST handbook that there's an example of a chemical plant I used in Netherlands. It was a Shell plant. And when they built this plant, they made an assumption that this chemical in conjunction with, when it came into contact with this catalyst, was inert. Why did they make the assumption? Because they did some calculations and some studies 30 years before, and it was inert. Fine. Now, over the years, the chemical changed, the catalyst changed, the manufacturer changed, and so on, and no one redid the calculation. But what was interesting is that within Shell, two other facilities in Shell in Southeast Asia. I think one of them was in Singapore. I think we have some Singapore people, if they're still awake, on this call, this webinar. It had happened twice. They'd had an explosion because this chemical and this catalyst got together. But when they built the new plant, they still used a probability of 0 for that happening. Therefore, they didn't have to take any profit. It happened twice. How can you still say 0? The same thing with aircraft accidents. They believe these probabilities, even though the things are happening. You know, I've seen these these risk assessments. This is why I'm so skeptical of these things. I see these risk assessments that says it's not going to happen for 100 years, whatever, and it happens, 5 times in the last couple of months. And nobody goes back and reevaluates that maybe their risk assessment was incorrect. People like the numbers, they want low numbers, they're not going to give them up. So, some questions for you in evaluating your own structure. Who designs the hazard analysis activities? Who's responsible for performing them? How does the information produced get to those who use it? Again, if you have a separate organization, doesn't work very well. If you have this integrated into your system engineering process, it works great. It's right there. What types of leading indicators do you use? What happens if they signal a potential problem? Is there some procedure for dealing with this leading indicator that just showed itself? Probably not, because they may be in the books, but people don't follow. Who's responsible for gathering, evaluating evidence about the truth of the probabilistic risk assessment? You can do them. Is there somebody evaluating? These are actually, just not calculating the first time, but over time, did they turn out to be correct? There have been only two careful, controlled scientific studies of probabilistic risk assessment, and each of them were an incredible failure. But people just ignore that. They want to believe it, so they believe it. At the very least, check that it's actually these assumptions underneath them are still true. What feedback and evidence is used to keep the mental models of decision makers consistent with the actual level of risk at any time? Again, I just actually did helped a company evaluate their safety management system. And I talked to people and I said, well, how do you, people were in charge of projects, whatever, project managers, and they said, well, how do you get information about the risk? And they said, well, there's this, I get this email once a week and it shows this lovely, risk matrix, which we're all familiar with, the red, green, yellow stuff. And I said, well, do you use it? And they said, oh no, it's totally useless. It doesn't provide any information that I really need. I don't care what that color is. I need to know information about how to deal with any risks that are happening and what's going on. So I just delete it. Whenever I get those, I delete them. And so I talked to the people who were providing these and creating these. And I said, do you know that people below you are just deleting them? And they said, really? They had no idea. Virtually always, and the next thing is, virtually always there are precursors before a major loss. As part of this noise signal problem, does your organization have a way of identifying the difference between noise and signals? You remember the Bhopal, all kinds of precursors. They're always a precursors. How are you dealing with them? Education and training. Is there education for everyone with safety responsibilities? Does it include the safety philosophy statement? Hazards and how to recognize them, safety constraints, priorities, and how to make decisions. Does training include why and not just what? Is it education versus training? This is the great, again, part of SubSafe. They do really, really good education. Does it include previous accidents? And what changes are made to prevent a reoccurrence? You know, the most amazing part, because Subsafe doesn't have any accidents, any recent accidents, they haven't had one for 57 years. Every year on the anniversary of the Thresher, they go and you play all these very affecting videos and they talk about it. The whole company and all their subcontractors get together and talk about safety. And the Navy people were absolutely flabbergasted on the Columbia accident investigation process, and I helped write that report with them. When we talked to people at NASA, all the engineers, and we said, have you read the Challenger report? And most of them hadn't. These are shuttle engineers. They're people doing safety and doing engineering and operations on the shuttle. And they never read the Challenger report? I mean, this is astounding. When the Columbia accident investigation report came out, the head of NASA told me, he set aside a special day, gave everybody off one day to read the report because he knew they wouldn't unless he set aside time for them. That's astounding problem. What types of special in-depth training about hazards for people that are interacting with complex systems, automation and robots? They're not getting the right training they need to deal with these robots and automation. There's all these hazards and they aren't being taught them. I go into these companies, I say, how do the workers know about what their hazards are, their job? They say, oh, well, they figure it out. They know what they're doing. No, that's just unfair. There's a list of what you need to know in the company paper. I'm not going to do all of that. Is training one time or is it continual? Is there an assessment process for the effectiveness of the training? What types of learning is done from incidents and accidents? And are managers involved in safety training? There's this thing called Train the Trainers. And is that what's called? Well, probably has a name wrong. The idea is that managers teach the thing. We teach them to teach it. People get the idea that managers at least know about it, and they get the idea that they care. They're bothering to teach it. Learning, continual improvement. What process is in place to ensure continual learning improvement? Not only, we never get it perfect to begin with, and as I said, things change and slip and change over time. How do we ensure we're continuing to prove and learn? So here's the, I finished on time, sorry, I thought I'd have, we're all doing this. We think we're gonna give all you breaks and then we get too enthusiastic in our charts. Here's a summary. Oh, I'm sorry, it isn't. This is the safety information system. There have been studies to show the differential factors between safe companies that have few accidents and companies that have lots of accidents. And there's two factors that stand out that are critical. One is top management belief in safety and emphasis on safety. And that's not surprising. The second is the quality of the safety information system. If you don't have the information, you can't do what you need to do, even if you want to do it. As again, this was this Shell thing with this catalyst and chemical. They had 2 accidents. Why? Was it documented somewhere? Was it in a form that the people who were designing the new plant could get to and see? Why was it ignored? How did it not get? Why was it not understood before they designed a new plant? Often after accidents, the information needed to prevent the loss existed but wasn't used or wasn't available. Has anyone done an evaluation of your safety information system lately? Think you ought to do it. Is information collected primarily because it's needed for government reports? This goes back to the compliance. So you collect the information that's required for your government reports. is, uh, well, you have to collect that information, but it may not be the information you need for safety. Is an evaluation done periodically to see if people are getting the information they need, and what do they need? Has a study been done what person actually needs for their responsibilities? That's what I was talking about. These people just delete the email about their risk information, their safety information, because it's not what they need. They can't use it. Is data turned into information? Data is not information. You have to change data. We have this big thing. Big data is somehow um, the solution to all problems. No, it isn't. Information is the solution to problems. Data is not, and it has to be changed into it. Is data collected but never analyzed? Sometimes I I went into a hospital and they showed me all these accident, incident reports they had, and they collected them and they had this beautiful database. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. I said, how do you analyze them? And they sort of blushed and said, well, there really isn't time to analyze them. So they were just sort of sitting in the database. That's obviously clearly not going to help. Is data presented in a form people can learn from, that they can use to apply to their daily jobs, that they can use throughout the whole product life cycle? Is the safety information system integrated in the environment with safety related decisions are made? Ask people, did you get the information you need? Do you know where to find it? Find out what information people need. If they don't know themselves, you're going to have to go in and evaluate and look at their job and help them figure out what they really need. Make sure they can get it when it's needed. It's a usable form. The other problem is, and I have a lot about this actually in my old book, Safeware, filtering of collected information. Information will tend to be suppressed, unreliable. They use checklists, which means that you don't get the information you probably need, but it's easy to collect. Do lawyers influence what's collected and reported? We've seen that a lot. The lawyer said it'll be deposed if there's an accident and a lawsuit, for therefore you can't collect it. Well, then you can't. You're bound to have a lawsuit, and this is, I call this the job security thing for lawyers. Okay, summary. This is where I said I was going to summary, and I just have a couple pages, and it's just the summary of the stuff we said. Commitment and leadership at all levels, a strong corporate safety culture, a clearly articulated safety vision, values, and procedures shared among stakeholders. That's that philosophy statement I said. Appropriate assignment of responsibility, authority, accountability, feedback loops, channels that provide an accurate view of the state of safety at all levels, integration of safety into the development and operations, not a separate independent group or a separate subculture. Individuals with appropriate knowledge, skills, ability, and passion. I didn't put that in. A designated process for resolving tensions between safety priorities and other priorities. How is this done? Is this done willy-nilly by the program manager? Is there some other way of doing this? Is there, for example, this independent technical authority which provides choices, but the program managers only pick from the list of acceptable choices? Risk awareness and communication channels for disseminating safety information, controls on migration toward higher risk, an effective and usable safety information system, continual improvement and learning, education, training, and capability development. So, and I didn't, as I said, it would have been so much better if we could have discussed this. There's just no way to do this with 500 people at a time, and probably more streaming it. So I hope that the slides are up there, the paper is up there. I hope the paper is useful. And there's even more information in my 2 books. If this is the kind of thing you're interested in, is your responsibility.